In a world dominated by swords, spells, and mystical beasts, a simple firearm might not seem like it can do much. It probably can't, but the Machinist doesn't use just a simple firearm. They've got gadgets too. The Machinist is and always has been one of the more complex jobs in Final Fantasy XIV, and the 5.0 Shadowbringers expansion hasn't changed that. But it's managed to refine the job into a gunslinging gadgeteer that deals massive damage to anything in its path. There's a lot to talk about for this job, so let's dive right into the overview. Like with most jobs in Final Fantasy XIV, the Machinist has a 1-2-3 combo that serves as the bread and butter for its kit. This combo is used to generate both of the Machinist's resources, the heat gauge and the battery gauge. Hits number 1 and 2 of the combo generate heat, while the third hit generates heat and battery. There's also the level 58 weapon skill Drill. This isn't part of a combo or resource generation, it's just a 700 potency attack with a 20-second cooldown. This should be used every time it's available, and paired with the buff Reassemble whenever possible. Reassemble, learned at level 10, guarantees that your next attack will be a critical direct hit and has a 60-second cooldown. Both the heat and battery gauge are used for something different, but the battery gauge is much simpler, so we're going to talk about that one first. The Automaton Queen, the evolution of the Rook auto turret, is the product of your battery gauge. It can be summoned with 50 battery gauge, and when activated, it will attack whatever target you had at the time of activation. It will not switch targets to attack what you're currently firing at unless its original target dies. Summoned at 50 battery gauge, the duration of the Queen is 12 seconds, but the Queen doesn't fight for the full duration. It has a summoning time of 5 seconds and a combat time of 7 seconds. Though the Queen only costs 50 battery, you can spend more battery on its activation. Doing so will increase its duration and the damage of its finishing move, Pile Bunker. Pile Bunker's potency starts at 800. When activated at 100 battery gauge, the Queen has a total duration of 20 seconds, meaning a summoning time of 5 seconds and a combat time of 15 seconds, and Pile Bunker's damage appears to double to 1600 potency. So that's a lot of facts, but believe it or not, the Automaton Queen and the battery gauge are the easiest things to manage in the Machinist kit. First, the Queen is autonomous, meaning once you turn her on, she'll fight for you without any additional inputs. Also, in general, you'll want to activate at 100 battery gauge to get the most out of the duration and the strongest Pile Bunker. And finally, your resource gain will come naturally from using your 1-2-3 combo and the move Air Anchor. Air Anchor is a 700 potency attack that generates 20 battery gauge on a 40-second cooldown. It is vitally important that you use Air Anchor whenever it's ready, so you fill your gauge as quickly as possible. The next thing in the Machinist kit is the Heat Gauge, HYPERCHARGE, WILDFIRE, and off-global cooldown abilities. That's a lot, so strap in. HYPERCHARGE is the ability we use to spend our heat gauge. Again, heat is primarily gained through the 1-2-3 combo, but you can also gain 50 heat instantly with the ability Barrel Stabilizer, which is unlocked at level 66. It costs 50 gauge to activate HYPERCHARGE, but we can hold up to 100 heat, allowing us to activate HYPERCHARGE 2 times in succession. The Machinist's off-global cooldown abilities are Ricochet and Gauss Round. Each of these abilities holds 3 charges at maximum, and each charge takes 30 seconds to recover. When the box is slapped, you enter the overheated state for 8 seconds and gain access to 2 new abilities, Heat Blast and Auto Crossbow. For now, we're going to focus on Heat Blast. Unlike normal weapon skills, Heat Blast has a 1.5 second global cooldown, and its additional effect reduces the cooldown of our OGCD abilities, Ricochet and Gauss Round, by 15 seconds per hit. You can use 5 Heat Blasts during HYPERCHARGE for a total of 75 seconds of cooldown reduction. What this means is, whenever you fire Heat Blasts, you either want to weave a Gauss Round or Ricochet between each Heat Blast, or make sure all of your charges are spent before firing all 5 blasts. Either method is fine as long as you're not missing out on Heat Blast and making sure not to waste too much cooldown reduction. Last but certainly not least, WILDFIRE is a special ability that synergizes with Overheat and Heat Blast or Auto Crossbow. On activation, it applies a status to a target for 10 seconds. At the end of the duration, WILDFIRE will explode and its damage will increase by 200 potency based on the number of weapon skills you hit during the 10 seconds. It's possible to hit a total of 6 weapon skills in the 10-second window, 5 Heat Blasts, and 1 additional weapon skill of your choosing. Alright, now that we know about the full kit, let's put it all together. Drill and Air Anchor are your highest priority actions. They do the most damage and should be used above all others. Next on the priority list is HYPERCHARGE and the 1-2-3 combo. These are both equally important because HYPERCHARGE grants you cooldown reduction for your OGCD abilities, Gauss Round, and Ricochet, while your 1-2-3 combo is how you build heat and battery. Your main goal with these actions is to make sure you don't bring your heat to 100 without spending it on HYPERCHARGE. Make sure you've spent all your Gauss Rounds and Ricochets before hypercharging so you don't waste any cooldown reduction for Heat Blast. And use your 1-2-3 combo to build heat for HYPERCHARGE and battery for the Automaton Queen. Also pair WILDFIRE with HYPERCHARGE whenever it's available. In short, Drill and Air Anchor are the top priority, HYPERCHARGE and the 1-2-3 combo are at a similar level of importance because they're connected, but HYPERCHARGE is more important because using it will consume your heat resource so you don't waste any. Alright, now that we've got all the base mechanics out of the way, we can talk about something a bit more fun, and that's melting large groups of enemies. Fighting large groups is just as intricate as fighting single targets, but there's a sick satisfaction about causing devastation on a massive scale. First up, your battery gauge is still a thing during large group fights, so you'll still want to use Air Anchor whenever it's off cooldown. Next, instead of using Drill, use Bioblaster, the ability that shares its cooldown. This deals minor damage and applies a moderate damage over time effect for 15 seconds. From there, what you'll do will depend on what you have available. Auto Crossbow is your strongest area attack, so if you have 50 or more heat, slap the box and start spamming. Next in line is Flamethrower, but you shouldn't roast bad guys unless Bioblaster's cooldown is above 10 seconds, so you don't have to cut your Flamethrower channel short. Finally, Spread Shot is your weakest area attack, and as such, it's the only one that builds resources. Spread Shot grants 5 heat per activation and hits for 180 potency to all enemies in a cone in front of you. You can also use WILDFIRE on high priority targets that are mixed in with large dungeon pulls. Apply WILDFIRE, HYPERCHARGE, then spam your auto crossbow. The target with WILDFIRE on will take a big burst of damage once the duration is up, and it will end up dying slightly faster than everything else. This will relieve some pressure from the healer and the tank. To wrap things up, there is a bit more nuance to the Machinist depending on your group composition, but I'm not going to get into all those details because we'll be here all day if I do. Every job changes their opening rotation slightly based on how your group is applying buffs, so if you're running with a consistent team, make sure to talk about that stuff before you get into combat, so everything lines up perfectly. With that said, there is a lot going on with the Machinist, but it all makes sense. Once you take the time to understand each part of your kit, slow it down, break it apart, put it back together, then start shooting. And there we go, that's going to do it for the overview of the Machinist. But before we wrap things up completely, I want to give a special shout out to my patrons, Avi, Joseph, and Tobias. You guys are awesome, and you have just been joined by another patron, the Mac Man. So all 4 of you, thank you so much for the extra support. It means the absolute world. In addition to the people that are watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting, you guys are throwing something extra at me, and it's a kick in the pants that tells me that I'm doing something right, and I really appreciate it. So thank you again for your patronage. With all of that said, we're going to wrap things up here by saying the name of the game is Final Fantasy XIV, the name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.